My name is John Broadwater. I served with the United States Air Force from 1971 to 1977. Started basic training at Lackland Air Force Base. Served also there for my tech school as a security policeman. From there I went to Shepherd Air Force Base out to be assigned to Det 1 2nd Bomb Wing of the Strategic Air Command. While assigned to that group, the group was deployed to Guam, and most of the security policemen, including myself, were sent to Southeast Asia.
My name is George Traub. I served in World War II in the United States Navy from September of 1943 or 1942 to January of 1946.
Boot camp on Paris Island, and I was transferred to Cherry Point Air Base in North Carolina, and that's where I spent my time working for the Post Exchange, the PX we call it. And I was a cobbler.
And so in September of '41, I went on active duty with the 754th Tank Battalion at Pine Camp, New York. And you all know what happened on December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. I was still with the tanks, but I had made an application to switch over to the Chemical Warfare Service, and the Adjutant General's Department decided that that was okay, and they switched me over. And 2 weeks later, of course, after Pearl Harbor, my tank battalion was shipped out to Australia, and lock, stock, and barrel.
But out in the rifle range was a little rough too, especially some of the DI's drill instructors. They were rough. I had one guy, Corporal Jaworski, I'll never forget him. I was firing in the BAR, that's a Browning automatic rifle, and we were supposed to fire bang, 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 and it's a semi-automatic, so I just pulled the trigger and brrr, shot them all off. And he came over and said, "Schwenk, what were you supposed to do?" I says, "Fire the gun." He says, "Not a gun, it's a rifle." And he had one of these fiberglass megaphones and cracked me right across the side of the face. Boy, it was cold and rainy and it didn't sting.
Whenever we were able to give you a shot, that takes priority over everything. And so we went all the way over to the lakeside, and the camp I was in at Great Lakes it was a new camp way in the back. We had to march all the way over. We got almost there, and they said, "You have to go back to your barracks. They got shots ready up for you." So we never got small boat handling. Same thing happened one day. We were going out to the small arms range. We were supposed to learn small arms, pistols, stuff like that. And on the way, a Jeep came up to our chief, and he said, "Okay, men, turn about." And double time back to the barracks, shots again. And so I got through boot camp without rowing a boat, without shooting a gun.
I had 5 years of ROTC. Well, along about the 4th year that we were in the class, where this Army officer was demonstrating to us and illustrating to us how we should use our rifle and the bayonet on the end of it to kill an enemy person. And this class that day for 45 minutes was standard class length. It got too much for me, and I got up and walked out in the middle of the class. And he said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I can't take this, I'm leaving." "Okay," he says, "you better go." So I left, and I thought about it and prayed about it for a few days. Then I went back to Colonel Green, who was in charge of the whole ROTC unit at Drexel. Well, I explained to him how I felt, and I said, "I feel that if we got into a war, I would still want to defend our country against an enemy, and I therefore, if you will accept me, I'll get back into the ROTC and continue." "Well," he says, "this is quite a switch," and he says, "I don't know whether you'd be any good to me or not." "Well," I said, "Colonel Green, that's all I can say, how I feel about this, and I have to leave it up to you." "Okay," he says, "I'll let you know." So next day he told me he's going to let me come back in.
One is Senior Master Sergeant Higgins, a great man to work for. He was always there. He was always there to keep the high brass off of us while we do our job. I worked with another young man known as Pharrell Bertrand. Last time I know he's down in Louisiana. He picked up the nickname the Crazy Cajun. We used to go out and get chili at one of the little restaurants out there in Grand Forks. And he would always empty 3 to 4 bottles of hot sauce in his chili. We always had a good time.
I remember
together.
really was down when I was still working in the shoe shop. It was run by Exchange, but there was a civilian that I was working with, and he was a former Marine, and he was real nice. He taught me the trade, and he used to invite me out to his home Sundays for dinners, and his wife, she made the best biscuits and roasts. And he also had a nice looking sister, which I used to pal around with, but nothing turned out.
I was a signalman. That meant visual signals that you usually connect with the Navy flashing light and flag hoist. And there was a guy that would come up to the bridge every once in a while. He was the chief electrician's mate, and he and I became very close friends. We went on liberties quite a bit because he was a Christian. He's the one that kept me straight. If it hadn't been for him, I probably would have wandered farther off base than I already did. But we had a great time, and after I got off to Yorktown, we wrote letters for a while, and then that faded out, so I've even forgotten the man now.
My best buddy was John Sarek. He was also a lieutenant. They were married, Doris and John, just shortly before Thelma and I, and so we invited them up to our wedding in March of '42, and so John was in his uniform, and so was I when we got married.
I was 19 years old at the time. I turned 20. So it was a way of growing up real quick. You grew up fast. You didn't have time to have that time of, okay, I'm going from teenager to the 20s, to think about it. You just automatically grew up. You became an old man.
I remember hanging out of the Bombay one day when we released a cluster of 500 incendiary bombs, and a couple of them came crashing up against the bottom of the Bombay door. Well, that was real exciting.
I was in a motorcycle accident back in 1948. I got called up in 50, and I was called back to the Korean situation, spent 2 days active duty and discharged.
And some of our submarines that sent back information said the fleet was down in the Philippine Sea. And so the admirals in charge of the fleet that I was with, the task force, got their heads together and found out there was a typhoon. Well, a typhoon's nothing more than a hurricane out at sea. And there was a typhoon between us and the Japanese fleet. And they had to argue, should we go through the typhoon, take a chance and go through, or spend several days going around it, and possibly, if we went around it, they would move and we would lose the fleet. We wouldn't know where the Japanese were. So they decided we could afford to go through it. Well, when we went through the typhoon, we had waves. The flight deck on the aircraft carrier is 85 feet above the waterline. We had waves breaking over the flight deck. And although they tied the planes down, we lost, I think it was 4 or 5 planes got washed over. And the ship I thought was going to crack. There was spaces in it when it would get on the crest of a wave, and I thought it was going to break in half. I was really scared at that time.
Well, with the present situation that we're in now, with the war on terrorism actually hitting us at home instead of us going to it and being hit overseas. It's something we all have to think about, because every one of us is now what I would call in combat against a foe. Everybody's a hero, whether you get medals or you don't get medals, whether you're allowed to wear ribbons or you're not allowed to wear ribbons. We're all heroes because we all must go forward with our lives, live the way we live the way we are granted our rights by the Constitution of the United States to live, We have to show that we are not afraid of terrorism.